Good morning, everyone. We are starting today with Shrimad Bhagavata Mahapurana, Book 10, Discourse 86, which is entitled The Lord's Grace on Srutadeva, though it actually starts with a different story. The Raja submitted, "O sage, we desire to know how my grandfather Arjuna married Subhadra, the sister of Balarama and Sri Krishna, who was my grandmother." Srishoka replied, "Wandering over the earth in the course of his pilgrimage, the powerful Arjuna went to Prabhasa and heard there of his maternal uncle's daughter Subhadra. He further learnt that Balarama would give her away to Duryodhana, but not others. Eager to win her, he went to Dwaraka, disguised as a recluse bearing a triple staff, which is a symbol of renunciation that recluses carry. There Arjuna spent the 4 months of the monsoon, intent upon accomplishing his object. He was every now and then honored by the citizens, as well as by Balarama, who could not identify him. One day, so it is said, he was invited as a guest by Balarama and brought to the palace, where he partook of the dishes offered with reverence. There Arjuna saw the youthful maiden Subhadra, who captivated the heart of heroes. With his eyes blooming with joy at her sight, he set on her, his heart agitated with passion. Subhadra too fell in love with him as soon as she saw him, ravishing as he did the heart of women. She cast her bashful glances at him and fixed her heart and eyes on him. Focusing his thought on her alone, Arjuna looked for an opportunity to run away with her. His mind being distracted by an overwhelming passion for her, he had no peace of mind. With the consent of her parents, Devaki and Vasudeva, as well as of Sri Krishna, he took her away one day, even as she drove out of the fort in a chariot to visit an important temple. Taking his seat in her chariot, Arjuna took up his bow and put to flight all the gallant warriors who tried to intercept him. In the midst of Subhadra's own people screaming, Arjuna stole her away, just as the king of beasts would carry away its prey. Hearing of this, Balarama was agitated like the ocean on a full moon and got pacified only when Sri Krishna and other friends and relations clasped his feet to appease his anger. Then Balarama joyously dispatched for the bride and the bridegroom presents in the form of abundant wealth and articles of household use and a number of elephants, chariots, horses, and male and female servants. Srishoka began again. At Mithila, the capital of the Videha territory, there lived a jewel among Brahmanas known by the name of Srutadeva, who had all his objects accomplished by virtue of his single-minded devotion to Sri Krishna and was tranquil, full of wisdom, and destitute of attraction for sense objects. Though a householder, he performed his duties and lived on whatever subsistence came to him without effort. Every day he got by the will of Providence as much as was barely necessary for his sustenance and not more. Contented with this, he discharged his duties in the proper manner. Dear Parikshit, the ruler of Mithila was similarly devoted to the Lord. He was known by the name of Bahulashva. He was free from egotism. Both the Raja and the Brahmana were beloved of Sri Krishna, the immortal Lord. Pleased with them both, the Almighty Lord once mounted the chariot brought by Daruka and drove to the kingdom of Videha, accompanied by a number of rishis. The Devarishi Narada, Vamadeva, Atri, my father Krishna Dvaipayana, Parashurama, Asita, Aruni, myself, Brahaspati, Kanva, Maitreya, Chyavana, and others formed the party. At every stage in the course of the journey from Dwaraka to Mithila, a protector of men, the citizens and villagers waited upon him, upon Krishna, with offerings in their hands, appearing as he did like the sun surrounded by planets. O king, during that journey of the Lord, the men and women of Anarta, Dhanva, Kurujangala, Kanka, Matsya, Panchala, Kunti, Madhu, Kekaya, Kosala, Arna, and those belonging to other territories who happened to be in the aforementioned territories, drank with their eyes the nectarine beauty of his lotus-like countenance enlivened by his winsome smiles and loving glances. on those people from whose eyes the scales of ignorance had completely fallen through his darshana, Sri Krishna, the Guru of the three worlds, conferred by his very look insight into the truth as well as final moksha, the fruit of such insight. And hearing, even as he advanced, his own glory sung by gods and men, which illumined the quarters and drove away all evil. In this way, the Lord slowly journeyed to Videha. Parikshit, delighted to hear of the arrival of Sri Krishna, the immortal Lord, the people of the city of Mithila and of the adjoining villages came forth to receive him with offerings in their hands. At the sight of the glorious Lord, their faces brightened and the buds of their hearts opened through ecstasy. With their heads bent low and with their palms joined on them, they greeted the Lord and his companions, the sages, of whom they had only heard before. Realizing that Sri Krishna, the Jagat Guru, had come to shower his grace on them, the Raja of Mithila, as well as Srutadeva, the devoted Brahman, fell at the feet of the Lord. With joined palms, they both simultaneously invited Sri Krishna, the scion of Dasharha, along with the sages, to partake of their hospitality. Accepting their invitation and with intent to please them both, the Lord simultaneously entered the residence of both in two separate forms, each unperceived by the other one. So to the Raja, it appeared that Krishna answered his invitation first, and to the Brahmana, it appeared that Krishna answered his invitation first. The Raja of Videha, Bahulashva, was a high-minded prince. Finding that Sri Krishna and others, whose very name could not reach the ears of the unrighteous, had called at his house uninvited, brought excellent seats for them and seated them all comfortably on them. His heart leapt for joy through intense devotion, and his eyes were bedimmed with tears. Bowing to them, he washed their feet and sprinkled that all-purifying water on his head and on his relatives, and worshipped the Lord as well as the divine sages by offering them sandal paste, flowers, textiles, ornaments, scented fumes, lights, oblations of water, cows, and oxen. After they had been heartily fed, Bahulashva placed the feet of Sri Krishna, who he knew was no other than Lord Vishnu, on his lap, and gently pressing them, and delighting him with sweet words, joyously prayed as follows. The Raja Bahulashva said, O Lord, you are the soul of all created beings, the witness of all hearts, and self-effulgent. You have presently revealed yourself to us who have been contemplating on your lotus feet. You have appeared before us just in order to vindicate that statement of yours which you have often declared, that neither Sri Balarama nor Lakshmi nor Brahma are dearer to you than one who is exclusively devoted to you. Is there any man on earth who would abandon your lotus feet even after he has come to know that you offer your very self to those sages of serene mind who regard nothing as their own, not even their body? Appearing in the race of Yadu, you have extended your glory, which is capable of wiping out the sins of the three worlds, in order to put an end to the transmigration of men revolving on the whirligig of births and deaths. Hail to you, the almighty Sri Krishna of unrestricted wisdom, who have taken to austerities in their mildest form in the person of the divine sage Narayana. Be pleased to stay in our house, O infinite Lord, for some days, along with the sages, and purify this line of Nimi with the dust of your feet. Thus entreated by the Raja, Sri Krishna, the Almighty Lord, the protector of the worlds, stayed on at Mithila for some time in order to confer blessings on the men and women of the palace, or of the place, of the whole city. Like the Raja of Videha, the Brahmana Srutadeva too was overjoyed to find Sri Krishna, the immortal Lord, and the sages arrived at his door, and bowing to them, he began to dance, waving his cloth, so the tradition goes. Bringing raised seats made of straw and mattresses of kusha grass from inside his cottage or borrowing them from his neighbors, he requested the guests to sit on them, and greeting them with words of welcome, he gladly washed their feet along with his wife. With that water, the highly blessed Brahmana sprinkled himself as well as his house and his people, and felt that all his objects had been achieved. He was transported with joy. He propitiated with whatever articles of worship could be procured, namely fruits and other offerings, cool scented and sweet water, scented earth, tulsi leaves, kusha grass, and lotuses, as well as with food which promotes the sattva guna. He reflected, I wonder how this meeting has been possible for me, condemned as I am to this hellish life of a householder, with Sri Krishna and these sages who have enthroned him in their hearts. the very dust of whose feet brings sanctity to all holy places. When the guests had partaken of his hospitality and were comfortably seated, Srutadeva, along with his wife, children, and other relations, waited on them and, touching the feet of Sri Krishna, his principal guest, addressed them. Srutadeva submitted, Lord, you are the Supreme Person. It is not for the first time that you have come to our view today, for you have been with us since the very beginning of creation, when, having created the universe with the help of your potencies, you entered it as its soul, as a sleeping person creates with his mind itself a peculiar dream world of his own through his ignorance, and, entering that world himself, appears in it in various forms. You shine in the heart of those men who constantly hear and repeat your stories, worship and bow to your images, and talk with one another about you, and have their heart purified. Though present in their heart, you are remote from those whose mind is distracted by activities and temporal duties. Though beyond the grasp of the various faculties of the mind, you are proximate to those who have developed the excellent qualities of their heart. Salutation be to you, who are the supreme spirit in the eyes of those who know the self, whereas before those who regard the body, etc., as their self, you come as death allotted by yourself. You are the ruler of all effects as well as of their cause. Your Maya cannot screen your vision, though it screens the vision of all others. O self-effulgent Lord, instruct us, your servants, what service we should render to you. The sufferings of men disappear as soon as you come to their view. Srishoka continued. Hearing these words of Srutadeva, the Lord, who dispels the agony of those who betake themselves to him in all humility, took the Brahmana by hand and smilingly said, so the tradition goes, Srutadeva, know that these sages have come here to shower their grace on you. They move about with me, purifying the world with the dust of their feet. The images of gods, holy places, and sacred waters purify one slowly by sight, touch, and worship after a long time. The saints do so at once. The gods, etc., derive their purificatory virtue through the very sight of exalted souls. The Brahmana, by his very birth, is superior to all beings in this creation, the more so if he is endowed with austerity, learning, contentment, and devotion to me. This personality of mine, endowed as it is with 4 arms, is not dearer to me than the Brahmana. Indeed, the Brahmana is an embodiment of all the Vedas, while I am the embodiment of all gods. Men of crooked understanding who do not know this truth regard only idols as worthy of adoration, and full of jealousy disregard the Brahmana, the Guru of the world, who is the same as I and their very soul. By perceiving me in all, a Brahmana bears in his mind that this universe, consisting of mobile and immobile creation, and the categories that contribute to its existence, are my manifestations. Therefore, O Srutadeva, worship these Brahmana sages with faith, regarding them as my own selves. If you do so, I shall have been directly worshipped, but not by any other means, through enormous wealth and show of splendor. Sri Shukadeva said, instructed as aforesaid by the Lord, Srutadeva worshipped him as well as the sages, as one with their own self, and attained oneness with God. Bahulashva, the Raja of Mithila, too attained the same state. Parikshit, God loves the devotee. He stayed on with his 2 devotees, and having taught them the ways of the righteous, returned to Dwaraka. Thus ends the 86th discourse, entitled Sri Krishna's Grace on Srutadeva, in the latter half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 84, a song of praise uttered by the Vedas. Parikshit submitted, how can the Sruti texts, dealing as they do with the gunas, refer directly to the absolute Brahman, which is indefinable and beyond the gunas, and transcends the cause as well as the effect? Srishoka replied, the Almighty Lord evolved the intellect, senses, mind, and the vital airs of the jivas for their enjoyment, acts of being born and so on, for enjoying the delights of the various worlds, and for final moksha. This indeed is the well-known secret of the Vedas relating to the Brahman, treasured up by Sanaka and others. Whosoever cherishes it will be shorn of identification with the body, etc., and attain blessedness. On this subject, I shall narrate to you a story connected with the divine sage Narayana, and shall also reproduce the dialogue between Narada and the sage Narayana. Going about the worlds on one occasion, Narada, beloved of the Lord, went to the ashram of Narayana at Badrikashram in order to see the immortal seer who has, from the beginning of the Kalpa, betaken himself in this land of Bharatavarsha for the prosperity and spiritual well-being of men, to asceticism coupled with piety, self-knowledge, and dispassion. Bending low, O jewel among the Kurus, Narada put this very question to the divine sage, who was seated there in his hermitage, surrounded by sages inhabiting the village of Kalapa. Kalapa is the village, and adjoining the village of Kalapa is the hermitage, Badrikashrama. Today it's more often called Badrinath, meaning the Lord of Badri, where there's a famous temple. In the midst of rishis who were listening, the divine sage Narayana actually gave to him the following reply, which embodied a discussion bearing on Brahman, held among the ancient rishis of Janaloka, the fifth heaven. The divine sage said, O Narada, son of Brahma the self-born, of yore there took place a meeting for exchange of views regarding the true nature of Brahman in Janaloka, a meeting of sages born of Brahma's mind and dwelling in that sphere of Janaloka, who were all lifelong celibates, or literally, who had directed the flow of their generative fluid upwards. On one occasion, when you had departed to Shvetadvipa to see Lord Aniruddha, a form of Lord Vishnu, the ruler of that island. This is Discourse 87, Book 10, Discourse 87. So Narada had gone to Shvetadvipa, which I suppose is by explanation of why Narada missed this meeting in Janaloka, since he was busy in Shvetadvipa at the same time. There ensued among the rishis of Janaloka a masterly and thorough discussion concerning the absolute Brahman, about which the Vedas remain silent. There arose the same question which you have put to me. Though equal in point of learning, ascesis, and practice of virtue, and although friends, foes, and neutrals were alike to them, they treated one as an expounder, while the rest remained inclined to listen. And that one who they were listening to was Sanandana. Sanandana said, at the end of Pralaya, the dissolution of the universe, the deities presiding over the Sruti texts and sprung up from his very first breath, awakened the Supreme, who had been lying asleep along with his potencies, having swallowed this universe evolved by himself, through hymns indicating his true character, in the same way as bards, depending for their subsistence on an emperor, call on him while he is asleep at daybreak, and awaken him with songs of praise, celebrating his exploits that contribute to his excellent fame. The Srutis prayed, manifest your glory, reveal your exalted nature, O unconquered Lord. Root out the nescience which has no beginning, of the jivas invested with an immobile or mobile body, nescience which has assumed the gunas for an evil purpose, obscuring the blissful nature of the jivas and thereby throwing them into bondage. Possessed as you are of all divine attributes by virtue of your own essential nature, O awakener of all the powers in those souls. The Veda is able to describe you when during the period of creation you sport in conjunction with your Maya or exist in your absolute state. The wise recognize this known universe to be Brahman, because it is Brahman alone that remains when all else is dissolved, and because it is from and into Brahman, which remains unchanged, that the universe emanates and returns, as the earthenware are evolved out of and disappear into clay. Hence, the Vedic texts have concluded as referring to you whatever is contemplated with the mind and uttered with the tongue. How could the feet of men placed anywhere be regarded as not placed on the earth? Therefore, O Lord of Maya, the wise have taken a plunge into the ocean of nectar in the shape of your stories that wash away the impurities of all men and shed their sufferings. What wonder then that they should get rid of their afflictions, who, having conquered by dint of their self-realization the tendencies of their mind, as well as the effects of time, O Supreme, contemplate on your essential character consisting of eternal consciousness and bliss. People live, like as in truly live, if they are obedient to you, or else they simply breathe like bellows. You are that by whose grace Mahat Tattva, Ahankara, etc., have brought into being this egg-like universe. It is you who animate the sheaths, assume the shape of those sheaths, and permeating them, although you are the ultimate substance underlying all, beyond the gross as well as the subtle, that which remains after all else has disappeared as the reality. Out of the paths, the many paths leading to God realization, chalked out by the seers, men, having their eyes blinded with gravel, so to speak, contemplate on Brahma as presiding over the spiritual center called Manipuraka, located in the abdomen, the Manipuraka chakra. While the sons of the sage Aruna contemplate on Brahmana manifested in the center known as the Anahata chakra, located in the cavity of the heart, the organ from which the veins and arteries branch out. Thence proceed upwards, O infinite Lord, the artery known as Sushumna, the Sushumna Nadi, the supreme effulgent channel leading to you, to the crown of the head, the seat of the spiritual center known as the Sahasrara chakra. Reaching this path, men do not fall again into the jaws of death here. Entering, as it were, the diverse types of living organisms evolved by yourself, though you already existed in them as their cause, and assuming those forms, you shine as high or low like fire, which, though undifferentiated in itself, that fire is fire, assumes diverse shapes according to the shape of what it is that's burning. Therefore, men of unclouded judgment who do not expect any reward for their actions, recognize your true nature as the one immutable, undifferentiated, and uniform substance in those unreal forms. The Vedas speak of the Purusha, and here Purusha is meant in the sense of the individual soul, dwelling in these bodies, shaped by itself, though as a matter of fact, it is not limited by anything which is of the nature of a cause or an effect, as a part made, as it were, out of you, the wielder of all potencies. Having thus determined the nature of the Purusha, the wise on this earth, full of faith, adore your feet, at which acts enjoined by the Vedas are offered, and which put an end to rebirth. Some who have got over their fatigue by diving into the ocean of nectar-like stories relating to you, who have assumed personal forms for the purpose of revealing the truth about your own self, which is difficult to realize, and who have renounced their home as a result of their fellowship with devotees, reveling like swans in the lotus of your feet, do not aspire even for emancipation, O Lord. This human body, when it follows the track leading to you, behaves as our own self, benefactor, and loved one. People do not find as much delight in you, who are favorably inclined towards them and are their well-wisher and loved one, nay, their very self, and kill their soul, so to speak, by pampering this body and those connected with it, by cleaving to which they are thrown into wretched wombs and revolve in this mundane existence, which is full of great fear. Oh, what a pity! By thinking of you, your enemies too have realized the same truth which ascetics that have controlled their breath, mind, and senses and rigidly practiced yoga contemplate in their heart. The women who set their mind on your stout arms resembling the body of Shesha, and even we, who look upon you as equally present everywhere and hold fast to your lotus feet, are equal in your eyes. Alas, what individual of posterior birth and death can possibly know you, who are anterior to all, and from whom came forth Brahma, the first sage, after whom appeared the two classes of gods, those presiding over the Indriyas, the mind, etc., and those presiding over the heavenly regions. When withdrawing everything into yourself at the end of creation, you repose, there exist at that time neither the gross phenomena, nor the subtle, nor the product of both, nor the flux of time, nor anything else, nor the scriptural texts. They who posit the coming into existence of that which did not exist before, as the Vaisheshikas do, the the Vaisheshika philosophers, in other words, posit that this world is an evolute of matter, or those who affirm, as the Naiyayikas do, the cessation, known by the name of liberation, of that which exists, which they categorize into suffering of 21 kinds, as well as they who admit, as both the Naiyayikas and the Sankhyas do, of diversity in the soul, or those who declare, as the Mimamsakas do, the fruit of actions to be real, inculcate all this on the ground of misconception. Since the conception of diversity with regard to the soul based on texts such as the soul is composed of the three gunas is caused by ignorance about you, the latter cannot exist in you who are above such ignorance, knowledge being your essence. All this universe, consisting of the three gunas, which is a projection of the mind, including the jiva, though unreal, appears as real, being superimposed on you. The knowers of the self recognize this entire universe to be real because of its being a projection of their very self. Just as those in quest of gold do not reject its modification because of its being gold itself. In other words, while they might be searching for raw gold ore in a mountain, they will not reject finding gold ornaments, even though it's not raw gold, it's gold that has been given some sort of a shape. So is this universe concluded by such knowers of the Atma to be their very self, even though it is not their raw, pure self, but their self worked into some shape. Inasmuch as it is evolved and interpenetrated by the Atma. They alone who worship you as the indweller of all created beings take no account and set their foot on the head of death, so to speak. You keep bound with the word of God as beasts, even the so-called wise. Indeed, they who have cultivated love for you purify themselves as well as others. Not so they who have turned their face away from you. Though devoid of organs, you wield the powers of all the organs, self-dependent as you are. As the rulers of subcontinents bear tribute to the suzerain lord of the entire globe, and unreservedly enjoy the tribute collected from their own people, so do Brahma and others, the creators of the universe, as well as the other divinities, the guardians of the various spheres, and those presiding over the 10 indriyas and the mind, etc., united as they are, which Maya, which has no beginning, bear tribute to you and gladly partake of the oblations offered by human beings through the yajna fire. Afraid of you, they do that work to which they have been appointed. When, O Lord, who are eternally free, the desire to sport with Maya, which has no beginning, appears in you who are beyond that Maya. The countless species of mobile and immobile creatures endowed with a subtle body made up of the latencies of their karmas and brought into existence by your very look come into being. To you, who are untainted like the sky and bear resemblance to the void and are supreme, none is kindred or alien. If the jivas are infinite, everlasting and all-pervading, infinite in number, everlasting and all-pervading, their subordination to another's will cannot be maintained because of their ultimate equality with one another as well as with yourself, any more than your control over them, which could be possible only in the opposite case, if they were limited, short-lived, or finite, O eternal Lord. That Brahman alone could be the ruler of the jiva, as whose evolute it has come into being, and which is inseparable from it as its material cause and is equally present in all, which is unknown to those who claim to know it, since whatever comes to be known is known imperfectly only. The birth of Prakriti or of Purusha does not stand to reason, inasmuch as both of them are birthless or without beginning. Living beings come into existence when the two, Prakriti and Purusha, come to be united, as bubbles appear on water through the interaction of air and water. Since the birth of the jivas in this way is only apparent and not a real beginning, that is why they get merged in you, the final cause, with their several names and attributes in the state of liberation, even as rivers disappear into the sea, or just as all kinds of nectars of flowers get dissolved into what is ultimately known by the name of honey. Perceiving the misapprehension implanted by Maya in these human beings, men of sound judgment develop intense devotion that grows every moment to you, who are capable of putting a stop to their transmigration. How can the fear of birth haunt those that worship you, since your frown in the shape of time, with its threefold rim, which consists of the year divided into three parts, inspires terror into those who do not resort to you as their asylum? They who endeavor to break the most restless steed of their mind, unsubdued by those who have controlled their senses and breath, neglecting the feet of their guru, and taking pains over other devices, remain beset with 101 calamities in this world, like merchants that have not secured a pilot for their vessel in the sea, O birthless Lord. What is to be gained by men through kinsfolk, progeny, body, wife, wealth, houses, land, their life and chariots, etc., while you, the self of the man seeking shelter in you, the embodiment of all blessings, are there? Indeed, what object in this inherently perishable world, intrinsically shorn of all substance, can gratify those who are unaware of this truth and are striving for the pleasure of married life? Sages who are destitute of pride and treasure your lotus feet in their heart, and the water washing whose feet is capable of destroying the sin, yet resort to the numerous holy lakes and rivers and places of pilgrimage on the earth. For they who set their mind once on you, their self, the embodiment of everlasting bliss, no longer remain attached to their household, which drains the very best in men. If it is argued that this universe is real in that it has evolved from the real, this proposition is surely disproved by a critical examination. The fact of an effect following the nature of its cause varies in certain cases, while in cases the evolute of a real substance is known to be false. So the examples here given are that while a son is the effect of his parents, he is found to be different from them. Whereas while the perception of a serpent following from a real substance, a rope, though there is a real thing that gives rise to the perception, there is no real serpent. The world is a product of both Brahma and Avidya. Hence, it is not real. It is rather like a mirage, something that is perceived from real causes, but that which is perceived is not the actual nature of the reality. For explaining worldly transactions, the illusory nature of the universe is more welcome. For worldly transactions will be carried on by blindly following past traditions. Your word deludes by its manifold powers of expressing, indicating, or suggesting a meaning only those dull-witted persons who have been blinded by their excessive faith in Vedic rituals. Since this phenomenal world neither existed in the beginning, nor will it survive after dissolution, hence it is concluded that during the intervening period, it falsely, while it seems to exist, it falsely appears in you, the absolute existence. Therefore, it is likened to the ways of the diverse manifestations of material substances, like the earthen jar from clay, or like the gold earring from gold. Therefore, ignorant are they who recognize this unreal world, a play of fancy, to be real. Since under the influence of Maya, the jiva embraces ignorance, it identifies itself with the body, senses, and so on, and then, acquiring the characteristics of these, undergoes transmigration, its divine nature being obscured. You, on the other hand, keep that ignorance away, as a serpent casts off the slough. In other words, its shed skin. Retaining your divinity and possessed of infinite power, and shine in your eightfold glory. If strivers do not tear the roots of passion planted in their heart, you remain difficult of access to such vile persons, though present in their heart, like a gem about the neck of a man who has forgotten that he wears it. And for yogis given to the gratification of their senses, O Lord, there is misery from both sides, from death that has not turned its back on him, and from you whose truth remains unrealized. He who has come to know you no longer feels the impact of joys and sorrows that follow from good and evil acts, coming in relief by your will, nor does he recognize in that state the commandments of the Vedas, intended as they are for those identified with their body. For ushered through the ears by men day after day with the help of teachings handed down from age to age, O all, O Lord with divine properties, you are attained by them in the form of final moksha. Even Brahma and others, the rulers of the heavenly regions, could not reach your limit, nor even you, because of your being limitless. You in whom, indeed, driven by time, float together like particles of dust in the air, multitudes of cosmic eggs, along with their sheaths. In other words, multiples of universes. That is why we Srutis, finding our end in you, become fruitful in you by negating everything other than you. The Lord, the divine sage Narayana, continued. Having heard in this way the aforesaid exposition regarding the self, and realized the nature of the self, and achieved their end, Sanaka and others now paid their homage to Sanandana, their guru for the time being. In other words, any of them could be the gurus of the others. These sages are all peers in Janaloka, but they elected Sanandana on this occasion to give the discourse. In this way was churned out by the exalted souls, who are the earliest born and course through the air, the essence of all the Vedas, the Puranas, and the Upanishads. Cherishing with faith, O Narada, son of Brahma, this exposition relating to the self, capable of burning out the desires of men, perambulate you at will the globe. Srishoka went on. Receiving thus with reverence what was imparted. Okay. Thanks for coming, Radhaji. Continuing. Receiving thus with reverence what was imparted by the divine seer Narayana, the sage Narada, who had control over his self, who was accomplished of his purpose, who bears in mind the teachings of the scriptures and observes the heroic vow of perpetual celibacy, submitted, O Raja. Narada prayed, Hail to the celebrated Lord Sri Krishna of stainless glory, who assumes charming forms for putting an end to the birth of all created beings. Bowing low in this way to the sage Narayana, the most ancient rishi, as well as to his high-souled disciples, Narada proceeded from that place of hermitage, to the hermitage of my father, the sage Dvaipayana, directly present there. And so, what we mean by directly present there makes sense if you've been to Badrinath, the valley of Badrinath, where this is set. The village and the hermitage of the Rishi Narayana are just like right next to the hermitage of Vyasa, like less than a day's walk. It's right there in the same valley. Welcomed by the divine sage and having taken his seat, Narada reproduced to him the aforesaid hymn, as heard from the lips of the sage Narayana. In this way has this hymn been reproduced by me, O Parikshit, describing how the mind could penetrate Brahma, even though the latter was indefinable and untouched by the three gunas, which precisely was the question that had been put to us by you. Since, of course, Vyasa, who heard this from Narada, was the father of Shuka and taught it to Shuka, who is now repeating it to Parikshit. One should constantly meditate on Sri Hari, the dispeller of fears, who in his absolute state keeps Maya at a distance, who plans this universe and continues at the beginning, middle, and end of it, who is the ruler of both the unmanifest Prakriti and the Jiva, who having created this universe and entered it forthwith along with the Jiva, evolves bodies and controls them, and having attained to whom the Jiva sheds ignorance, in the same way as a man fast asleep loses consciousness of his body. Thus ends the 87th discourse, entitled A Song of Praise Uttered by the Vedas, forming the theme of a dialogue between Narada and the divine sage Narayana, in the latter half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 88, Lord Rudra Rescued. The King Parikshit submitted. Those among the Devas, Asuras, and humans that worship Lord Shiva, who has spurned all enjoyments, are generally found to be wealthy and enjoying the pleasures of sense, but not so those who are devoted to Lord Vishnu, the spouse of the goddess of wealth, who one might think would be endowed with all enjoyments. We are eager to know how it is that the lot of those worshipping the two, Lord Shiva and Lord Vishnu, of contrary disposition, is the opposite of what might be expected. Great indeed is our doubt on this point. Srishoka replied, Lord Shiva ever remains united with his Shakti. He is invested with the three gunas and is the deity presiding over Ahankara, which is threefold, Sattvika, Rajasika, and Tamasika. Out of these three varieties of Ahankara are evolved the 16 final evolutes. He who worships the deity presiding over any one of these obtains access to all forms of prosperity. Lord Vishnu, on the other hand, is the Supreme Person himself, beyond Prakriti and devoid of the gunas. He is omniscient and the witness. Anyone worshipping him is rid of the gunas. At the conclusion of the Ashvamedha sacrifices, your grandfather, Raja Yudhishthira, while listening from the lips of the Lord to an exposition of sacred duties, put this question to Sri Krishna. Sri Krishna, the Almighty Lord, who appeared in the race of Yadu for ensuring the highest good of men, felt pleased and spoke to the king, who was eager to listen. The glorious Lord said, Him on whom I shower my grace, I gradually deprive of wealth. His own people thereupon forsake him when he is reduced to penury and stricken with sorrow. When, striving with intent to acquire wealth, he finds all his attempts abortive and, getting disappointed, makes friends with my devotees, that is the time I show my grace to him, whereby he attains that supreme infinite Brahman, which is subtle and consists of pure consciousness and truth. That is why people turn their back on me as one very difficult to please, and worship other deities. Elated through the royal fortune obtained from gods who are quickly propitiated, they get intoxicated and go astray. Forgetting the very gods that conferred boons on them, they neglect them. Srishoka continued, Dear Parikshit, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, and the other gods have the power to curse as well as to bless. Lord Shiva, as well as Brahma, are very prompt in blessing as well as in cursing. Not so Vishnu. In order to illustrate this truth, the wise relate an ancient anecdote showing how by conferring a boon on the demon Vrika, Lord Shiva got into trouble. Meeting the celestial sage Narada on the way, this evil-minded demon, Vrika by name, son of Shakuni, inquired which of the three gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, was quick to propitiate. The sage replied, Betake yourself to Lord Shiva. You will gain your object very soon. He who is soon pleased with a small measure of merit and gets angry equally quickly through a slight offense. Pleased with Ravana and Bana, who glorified him like bards, he conferred immense wealth and power and courted serious trouble thereby. Instructed thus, the demon worshipped Lord Shiva, the destroyer of the universe, propitiating by him by means of offerings of his own flesh out of his body through the mouth of fire at the sacred spot of Kedara, a summit of the Himalayas. Unable to gain the sight of the Lord, even after worshipping him in this way for 6 days, he proceeded out of despair on the 7th day to lop off with his sword his own head, the hairs on which were wetted through a dip in the holy waters of that place. Since the Kedara peak is the source of the river Mandakini, the holy river Mandakini. The highly merciful Lord Shiva, who wears matted locks on his head, rose out of the flames, brilliant like the god of fire, and holding Vrika by the arms with his own arms, deterred the latter from cutting off his own head, even as we would deter a friend from committing suicide. Through his blessed touch, the demon was whole again. The Lord said to him, O dear one, enough of this, no more of this. Ask of me any boon of your choice, and I shall grant it to you. I should be pleased with a little water offered by men who resort to me. Oh, in vain is this body tormented by you so cruelly. The highly wicked demon sought from the Lord a boon which was terrifying to all beings. He said, On whosoever head I should place my hand, let him die. Hearing that request, O scion of Bharata, Lord Rudra looked grave, as it were, and then laughingly said, Amen. He thus conferred on him a boon, which was as good as giving milk to a serpent. Thus assured, the said demon was, as a matter of fact, possessed with the desire of laying his hands on the goddess Parvati. And in order to test the boon, the demon, it is said, proceeded to try to place his hand on the head of Lord Shankara himself. The all-blissful Lord now got dismayed at his own act of granting that boon. Trembling in great fear, he fled before the Asura, who now pursued him. He covered the whole length of the earth and heavens and reached the very end of the cardinal points. But finding the Asura still pursuing him, ran further in a northerly direction. Finding no remedy for the trouble, all the great gods kept quiet. Finally, Bhagavan Shankara went to the shining region of Vaikunta, lying beyond the sphere of Prakriti. It is the realm of Bhagavan Narayana, the supreme resort of recluses who, having taken a vow of complete nonviolence, have attained perfect tranquility of mind. On reaching this region, one does not return to mundane life. Seeing Shiva in that miserable plight from a distance, Bhagavan Narayana, who removes all affliction, assumed the form of a young brahmachari by dint of his yoga maya, and appeared before Vrakasura. Adorned with a girdle made of munja grass, deerskin, a staff, and a rosary of rudraksha beads, he shone by his luster like the fire. Holding a bunch of kusha grass in his hand, he hailed the Asura like a humble servant. The Lord, disguised as a brahmachari, said, "O Vrakasura, evidently you are fatigued. Have you covered a long distance? Rest yourself a while. This body is the source of all blessings. Mighty as you are, please tell me, if the matter is fit for our ears, what you have set your mind upon, for people generally seek to accomplish their object through persons chosen for their help." Srishoka went on. Thus questioned by the Lord in words raining nectar, the Asura felt refreshed and related to him in order of sequence all that he had done. The Lord said, "If it is so, then we do not believe his words. Do you not know that under the curse of Daksha he has adopted the ways of Pishachas? He is now the ruler of Pretas and Pishachas. O Lord of Asuras, if you still repose faith in Shankara as the teacher of the world, well, the truth may be verified this very instant, O dear friend, by placing your hand on your own head. O chief of Asuras, if the words of Shankara are found to deviate from truth in any wise, you had better do away with that liar so that he may not utter a falsehood again." The words spoken by the Lord were so very sweet and cast such a magic spell on him that he lost his power of reasoning, and the wicked Asura, in utter forgetfulness, placed his hand on his own head. Instantaneously he fell down with his head split as if by a stroke of lightning, and shouts of triumph, salutations, and applause were raised in heaven. On the sinful Vrakasura reigned, having been killed, gods, Pitris and Gandharvas, they rained down showers of flowers on the corpse of Vrakasura, and Bhagavan Shankara was redeemed from a precarious situation. The Almighty Lord Vishnu then said to Shankara, who was now free of his trouble, "O Lord, O supreme deity, this wicked Asura has been killed by his own sins. O Lord, having actually sinned against the great, who can possibly be happy? Much less could he be happy who did wrong to you, the Lord and Guru of the universe. Sri Hari is an ocean of powers, which are both incomprehensible and beyond the range of speech. He is no other than the Supreme Spirit, beyond Prakriti. He who relates or listens to this story of his rescuing Lord Shankara gets completely freed from births and deaths and is rid of the fear of enemies." Thus ends the 88th discourse, entitled Lord Rudra Rescued, in the latter half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 89. Srishoka began again. O Raja, on one occasion, great sages assembled on the bank of the Sarasvati River for exchange of views on the object of life and the means of attaining them. In the course of their discussion, a question came up before the assemblage as to which of the three lords of creation, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, was the greatest. O Raja, the rishis actually deputed Bhrigu, one of Brahma's sons, to ascertain the out of curiosity fact with intent to know this truth. Maharishi Bhrigu first visited the court of Brahma, and with a view to testing Brahma's forbearance and other qualities, did neither bow to him nor offer any praises. Brahma got angry with him and looked as if burning with his majestic glow. But considering that the insult was offered by his own son, Brahma, the self-born, subdued the anger of his heart within his mind by force of reason, just as one extinguished fire by water, which is an evolutive fire itself. From Brahma's court, the sage Bhrigu went to Kailasa, the home of Shiva. Seeing that it was his own brother Bhrigu who had come on a visit to him, Lord Shankara, the supreme deity, rose in great joy from his seat and proceeded to embrace the sage. But Bhrigu avoided his touch, saying, "I shall not touch you, since you have broken social conventions and flouted the injunctions of the Vedas." Shiva lost his temper when he heard this. His eyes shot fire. Taking up his trident, he proceeded as if to strike the sage. But goddess Parvati, falling at Shiva's feet, pacified him by soothing words. Thereafter, Bhrigu went to Vaikunta, the realm of Bhagavan Vishnu. He found the Lord reposing with his head on the lap of Lakshmi, the goddess of prosperity. Breaking into the room unceremoniously, the sage suddenly kicked Vishnu on the chest. The Almighty Lord, the refuge of the virtuous, thereupon rose with Lakshmi, alighted from his bed, and, bowing his head to the sage, said, "O sage, you are welcome. Make yourself comfortable on this seat and rest a while. Unaware of your arrival, we could not offer you welcome in time. Pray forgive us this omission. O great sage, your feet are so soft, O dear one." Saying this, the Lord began to knead the feet of the sage with his own hands, and again said, "O sage, the water touched by your feet lends sanctity even to the sacred waters. Sanctify me, my realm, and the protectors of the world residing in me with the same. O worshipful sage, all my sins have been washed off by the very touch of your feet. From this day I have become the sole abode of Sri Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth. She will hereafter dwell on my bosom." Srishoka continued. Hearing these words of the Lord uttered in a deep, low tone, the sage Bhrigu felt highly satisfied and happy. His voice got choked through the rising tide of devotion, and tears rushed to his eyes. He could not utter a word. "O Raja," returning to the assembly of sages, who were all expository of the Vedas, he narrated all that he had experienced. Hearing his experiences, the sages in the assembly were filled with wonder and freed from all doubts. They were now convinced that Vishnu was the supreme deity, the fountainhead of tranquility and security. From Vishnu proceed virtue itself, wisdom, dispassion, united with it, the 8 forms of supernatural powers and fame, which wipes out the impurities of the mind. He is described as the supreme resort of saints and sages, who are embodiments of peace, equanimity, and detachment, and who have taken a vow of complete nonviolence. The quality of sattva constitutes his beloved person, and the Brahmana is his favorite deity. Men possessed of disinterestedness, serenity, and subtle understanding take to his adoration. It is his Maya, constituted of the 3 gunas, which has evolved his 3 forms, the Rakshasas, the Asuras, and the Devas. Of these, only Devas, embodying the Sattva guna, are the means of his realization. Srishoka went on. The sages assembled on the bank of the Saraswati River arrived at this conclusion for dispelling the doubts of men. Adoring the lotus feet of the Supreme Person, they attained to his supreme state. Sutta said, so we're zooming one narrator further out. This story, which brings out the glory of the Supreme Person, dispels the fear of transmigration. Like sweet-smelling nectar, it has emanated from the lotus-like lips of Srishoka, the son of the sage Vyasa. The traveler who, coursing through the circuitous paths of this world, constantly drinks of it through the cups of his ears, gets rid of the fatigue of wandering through the world. Srishoka resumed, "Parikshit, once upon a time at Dwaraka, the wife of a Brahmana gave birth to a child, but the moment it was born and touched the ground, they say, it died. Taking the deceased child to the portal of the royal palace, the Brahmana laid it on the ground, and with a heart full of grief began to weep piteously. He spoke thus, 'My child has died because of some vicious act of the ruler of this kingdom, who is a Brahmana hater, has a wicked disposition, is full of avarice, and has set his mind on the pleasures of his sense. The people, depending on a ruler who take delight in bloody acts, who has a vicious character and is a slave to his senses, lead a miserable life and are always in distress for want of money. The second and third child of the Brahmana sage also died under similar circumstances, and the Brahmana brought their dead bodies in the same manner to the palace gate, and repeating the same observation in a loud tone, left the deceased children there. Thus, as many as 8 children of the Brahmana died, one after another. When he repeated the complaint at the loss of his 9th child, Arjuna happened at that occasion to be sitting by the side of Lord Sri Krishna. Hearing the remarks of the Brahmana, he vauntingly said, "O venerable Brahmana, is there no kshatriya who can wield a bow in the city of Dwaraka? It seems these Yadavas, who are unable to protect their subjects, are no better than Brahmanas assembled for a sacrifice. The rulers in whose kingdom a Brahmana grieves over the loss of his wealth, wife, or children are mere actors playing the role of a kshatriya only to fill their belly. O Brahmana, I undertake to protect the child that may be born to you hereafter, afflicted as you and your wife are here. If I fail to carry out my promise, I shall jump into the fire and atone for my sin." The Brahmana said, "When Sri Balarama, Bhagavan Sri Krishna, Pradyumna, the foremost of archers, and the matchless warrior Aniruddha have failed to protect my children, how dare you undertake to do so? Even those lords of the world find it an impossible task. It is simply childish on your part to brag like this. We cannot put any faith in your words." Arjuna said, "I am neither Balarama nor Sri Krishna nor again Pradyumna. Surely I am Arjuna, the wielder of the famous Gandiva bow, O worshipful one. Please do not make light of my prowess, with which I pleased the three-eyed Shankara himself. I shall conquer even the god of death in battle and bring back your child, my master." Parikshit, thus assured by Arjuna, the Brahmana returned to his place full of delight and eager to witness Arjuna's prowess. As the period of confinement of his wife drew near, meaning for childbirth, the exalted Brahmana approached Arjuna in great anxiety and entreated him, saying, "Pray protect my child from death." Arjuna sipped a little pure water and bowed to Bhagavan Shankara. Thereafter he invoked all his weapons of supernatural efficacy and took up his Gandiva bow, having strung it properly. He fenced on all sides, as well as above and below, the house of confinement, with arrows charmed with the powers of mantras, thus encasing it in a cage of arrows, as it were. The wife of the Brahmana in due course gave birth to a child, which gave repeated cries, but presently it bodily disappeared through the sky. Now the Brahmana began to censure Arjuna in the presence of Sri Krishna. He said, "Look at my folly. I put my faith in the futile boast of a eunuch. Who else is powerful enough to save one whom neither Pradyumna nor Aniruddha nor even Balarama and Sri Krishna could protect? Fie upon Arjuna, who made empty boasts. Fie upon the bow of Arjuna, who indulges in self-praise. Look at his dull wittedness. The fool intends to bring back what has been snatched away from me by providence." When the Brahmana sage began to reproach him thus, Arjuna, with the help of charms, at once went to the capital of Yama, where rules the god of retribution. Not finding the child of the Brahmana there, he thence proceeded, bow in hand, to the cities of Indra, the lord of immortals, Agni, the god of fire, Nirti, the god of death, not the god of death in the sense of Yama, but the god of like the darkness and tragedy of death, Soma, the moon god, Varuna, the god of water, Vayu, the wind god, to the netherworld known as Rasatala, to regions higher than Indra's paradise, and other regions, but he did not find the Brahmana child anywhere. Having thus failed to redeem his promise, he now decided to jump into blazing fire. But Bhagavan Sri Krishna deterred him, saying, "Brother Arjuna, do not make light of yourself in this way. I shall show you all the children of the Brahmana. The very men who reproach you now will then resuscitate our spotless glory." Thus consoling Arjuna, the Almighty Lord Bhagavan Sri Krishna took Arjuna with him, and mounting his divine chariot, proceeded towards the west. Crossing the 7 dvipas, each containing 7 mountain ranges, the 7 oceans dividing those dvipas from one another, and the Lokaloka mountain situated beyond them all, he entered the region of thick darkness. Parikshit, his horses, Shaibya, Sugriva, Megha, Pushpa, and Balahaka, lost their way in that darkness. Seeing them in that plight, Bhagavan Sri Krishna, the Lord of all great masters of yoga, sent ahead of him his discus Sudarshana, which shone like 1,000 suns. Quick as thought, Sudarshana made its way through that extensive, thick, and most terrible darkness created by the Lord himself, piercing it by its enormous light. It appeared like a shaft discharged from the bowstring of Sri Rama, penetrating the armies of Rakshasas. Following the path made by Sudarshana, the chariot reached the end of the region of darkness. Beyond it shone the region of supreme, infinite, and all-pervading light. Dazed by that light, Arjuna had to shut both his eyes. Crossing the region of light, the divine chariot entered the region of supramundane water, which looked most beautiful because of its huge waves created by a strong wind. A wonderful and most luminous palace, shining with thousands of columns of brilliant jewels, appeared before them there. Bhagavan Shesha, most terrible and wonderful to look at, was present there. possessed of 1,000 hoods, each radiant with many jewels on its top and 2 fearful eyes. He shone brightly, like the white Kailasa mountain, and was blue at the neck and endowed with blue tongues. Arjuna saw the most exalted Supreme Person, the all-pervading Lord of infinite powers, reposing on Shesha, making the coils of the latter his comfortable bed. His form resembled in color a cloud surcharged with humidity. He was clad in bright yellow, and his cheerful countenance and big eyes looked charming. The luster of the earrings and of the crown on his head, containing many precious jewels, lighted up his profuse curly locks. He possessed 8 long and lovely arms. The Kaustubha gem shone at his neck. His chest bore the mark of Srivatsa, and the garland of sylvan flowers hung up to his knees. Arjuna saw that the Lord's attendants, like Nanda and Sunanda, his discus, Sudarshana, and other weapons, endowed with personal forms, his 4 potencies, Pushti, Sri, Kirti, and Maya. In other words, grace, splendor, fame, and illusion. And all the fortunes waited on him, who is the Lord of Brahma and the other rulers of the world. Bhagavan Sri Krishna bowed to the infinite Lord, who was but himself in another form. Arjuna was filled with awe at his darshana. He too bowed to him, and both of them stood with joined palms. With a smile on his lips and in a deep and sonorous voice, the perfect person who is the Lord of Brahma and other protectors of the world said to them, "Desirous of seeing you both, I had the sons of the Brahmana brought here. You have both appeared on earth with your part manifestations for the vindication of virtue. Killing the asuras who have become a burden to the earth, soon return to me. You are the sages Nara and Narayana. Though sated in every way and foremost of all, follow the path of virtue for maintaining the world order by setting an example before men." The said Sri Krishna and Arjuna accepted the mandate of the Supreme Person, bowed to him, and supremely delighted, returned to Dwaraka with the sons of the Brahmana, following the same route by which they had gone there. The sons of the Brahmana had grown up according to their respective age, but in appearance they were the same as at the time of their birth. Bhagavan Sri Krishna and Arjuna returned them to the Brahmana. Seeing the glorious realms of Bhagavan Vishnu, Arjuna felt much astonished. He realized that whatever prowess is possessed by men was due to the grace of Bhagavan Sri Krishna. Exhibiting these and many other similar feats, Bhagavan Sri Krishna appeared to men as if enjoying worldly pleasures and performed sacrifices on the highest scale like the greatest of kings. Just as Indra sends down timely showers, so he showered all boons on the Brahmanas and other subjects, adopting the conduct of an ideal Raja. He himself killed many an unrighteous king and caused many others to be killed by Arjuna and others. In this way, he easily reestablished the rule of Dharma with the help of Yudhishthira and other Dharmic Rajas. Thus ends the 89th discourse entitled "The Lord Brings Back the Sons of a Brahmana," and the latter half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahamsa Samhita. And I think we can stop there for today. Thank you guys very much for coming.
Thanks, Deva.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Do you have a minute for a couple questions?
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay. Thanks. That was a really that was a pretty intricate chapter of Song of Praise uttered by the Vedas.
Mm-hmm.
Shrutis.
Yeah.
Could you kind of like paraphrase the complexity of that chapter? I feel like it could also summarize maybe like a little more simply than, there was some, sometimes these chapters have very stretched out, like they'll just say like, just to say hello to Krishna when he walks in a room, it'll be like a 2-page greeting of how awesome Krishna is,
Yes, that is very true.
So is there some way to kind of like summarize that chapter of what they were getting at? What a song, a prayer? Yeah, you know what I'm saying? It was
yeah, I know the chapter. That you mean. So a lot of it is getting in. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
There was a question or something like that one character asked to another or something like that. And...
Yes. So the context of it in terms of the frame story was that So the original question was, Parikshit was asking Shukadeva how it is that the Vedas, which the Vedas are also called the Srutis,
Right.
how it is that they are often said to refer to Krishna when on the surface of it they don't seem to. That the Vedas, which Krishna constantly endorses as coming from him, refer mainly to, or at least the main part of the Vedas or Srutis that are known, refer to the Karma Kanda, which is the performance of yajnas for worldly benefit to summon the rains or so on, or for going to Indra's Svarga paradise after death by various means. And whereas and so essentially what it is so Shuka related a story of, it was one of these long nested narrations of the divine sage, the wandering sage Narada, asking the Rishi Narayana, who is an avatar of Vishnu, who then related a story of Sanandana giving a discourse in Janaloka on the subject of this interaction between, of this praise of the Vedas to Bhagavan Vishnu, in which they get into the inner essence of the Vedas. They repeatedly said, "You are our end." Now, the end of the Vedas, literally in Sanskrit, is Vedanta. Vedanta means Veda's end, essentially, not meaning end like the end in a linear sense, but the conclusion to which all the Vedas point, the conclusion to which their paths lead. And that is and they brought out that the inner essence of the Vedas. So there's kind of it's often split into the exoteric and the esoteric aspects of the Vedas. The exoteric aspect is the karma kanda, the yajnas and so on. The inner aspect, which is brought out in the primarily in the Upanishads, which are part of the Vedas, deals with the absolute Brahman. And they were bringing out the absolute Brahman lying as the essence of the whole manifest world that the Karma Kanda deals with how to operate. That the absolute Brahman is like the animating essence, the soul of the world, so to speak, is a way to paraphrase it. And that it represents the core of the Vedas, with the Vedas also covering, the Vedas being all inclusive, deal with the world and deal with the processes of the world, the devas who animate the processes of the world and how to operate them and work with them to maintain the ritta, to maintain the world order. But how the whole thing is a manifestation of the primal absolute Brahman, and also how Bhagavan Vishnu is identical with that absolute Brahman. How it has both the nirguna and the saguna aspects, the unmanifest formless aspect, and also the aspect that has form and personhood and personality in the sense, and is related to as Bhagavan in the sense of Vishnu.
Wow.
That was essentially the essence of it.
Yeah, I kind of had the gist. I kind of got the gist that there's a message of like, you know, the Vedas are talking about form and then they are a form, but their true essence is formless, kind of thing.
Essentially, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, it was deep, you know. I was like, wow. An intricate verse. It's beautiful,
yeah.
Really.
Yeah, it was one of the more subtle and also got into kind of commenting on various of the schools of philosophy in the so a lot of it kind of makes sense in the context of the philosophical debates between different schools. That if you're not familiar with those schools, then like commenting on their positions and arguments would seem kind of opaque or irrelevant, perhaps. But that's what some of it got into.
Wow. Yeah. And two, now this Narayana of this verse, is this like, who, like like we all sing bhajans too and things when, Amma has her, Narayana, Hari,
Sure.
Narayana.
So there's
that.
two Narayanas here.
Aha.
There's two Narayanas here.
Both Vishnu,
there's Vishnu, another name of whom is Narayana.
Right.
But then Vishnu took, among his many avatars, one was a double avatar. He took birth, two avatars at once, Nara and Narayana, who were two sages, who are eternally performing deep meditation in the valley of Badrikashrama in the Himalayas. And it was that Narayana, the avatar, Narayana, the man, the sage, who was giving this discourse to Devarishi Narada.
Right. Who, of course, Narada would normally be common to visit the Vishnu Narayana.
Yes.
Also, he goes to visit him too, which was that's an interesting connection there.
Yes. And so it's it can be a little confusing because this avatar named Narayana has the same name as Vishnu himself. But in this case, we were talking about Narayana, the sage, meditating in the valley of Badrikashrama in the mountains, giving this discourse to Narada.
Right. Oh, wow.
And yes, Mary. So when Lord Narayana referred to Krishna and Arjuna as Nara and Narayana, not Nara and Narada, but Nara and Narayana. Yes, Krishna and Arjuna are in part rebirths. It's complex. So
right.
A part of the essence of this pair with their bond of incredibly close friendship. Because another thing to know about Nara and Narayana, these sages, is they're warriors as well as sages. They were kshatriyas.
Wow.
And they had this long heroic stories and leelas together of them being brotherly warriors as well as sadhakas, divine sages performing tapas.
Wow.
A part of that spark of the essence of the two of them and their bond of both spirituality and sort of warrior camaraderie and brotherhood was reborn as Krishna and Arjuna and manifested itself in the relationship of Krishna and Arjuna.
Wow.
And Krishna, of course, was a Purana avatar, and Arjuna was mostly not an avatar. He had a little bit of the spark of his father Indra in him, but he also had this spark of Nara, the sage Nara. So he had a little bit of a spark of an avatar of Vishnu in him as well.
Wow.
And it's the other thing that's complicated about calling them rebirths of Nara and Narayana is that the sages Nara and Narayana were still living at the time.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Kind of like Parashuram hanging out with
also still living, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So how does Shesha come in and Balarama? And
Balarama is an avatar of Shesha.
But what is Shesha?
Shesha is a manifestation of Vishnu, again. Specifically a form that Vishnu takes primarily to perform cosmic functions of upholding and later destroying the world. So he has his station. Shesha's main station is below Patala Loka, at the very bottom of the world structure, and it's said that the whole thing rests on one of his 1,000 hoods. But he also was encountered outside, beyond the outer darkness, beyond the outer darkness that lies beyond the Loka mountain that rings the world. Essentially being that if you go outside the world in any direction, like at this point, kind of up and down no longer matters. Shesha is the force outside the universe that kind of maintains the outer boundary of the universe and holds it up from all sides, such that if you go outside of it on any side, we say holds it up as if he's beneath it, but like all direction kind of becomes a metaphor at this point. If you go out of it in any direction, he'll be there. Also, he maintains this potent fire inside him, which at the time of pralaya, he will spit out to burn the world and scour it free as part of the destruction process. So Shesha has this, and that's why Balarama, being an avatar of Shesha, is so prone to rage and anger. He has this fire of destruction, this like a serpent, that if the way that like a serpent will lash out if you step on it, for example. That's kind of in Balarama's essence, that he, much more than Krishna, as part of his character, is quick to kind of this smoldering rage.
Also like Lakshmana.
Yes, also like Lakshmana with Rama. Very similar dynamic.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a completely different level, but is it like Rudra and Shiva?
It's very similar. It's very similar, yes. Rudra too holds the fire of pralaya. He unleashes the same through his Rudra Tandava dance. He unleashes the exact same fire of destruction at the time of pralaya. He has a very, in that way, Rudra and Shesha are very similar in their essence and their flavor. Yeah.
So how does that energy relate to holding? You had mentioned holding.
Yeah, those are kind of the two main cosmic functions that Shesha performs. But like, they're two different energies that he enacts at different times. They relate kind of in that it's Shesha, in addition to holding up again, up is somewhat metaphorical here, but holding up the world, maintaining its boundaries. He's that holding energy, he kind of also directs inward to hold the fire of pralaya within himself until it's time to let it out. So it's kind of like this. Shesha kind of always exists in this this tension of holding intense tension still, both holding the world within its boundaries and holding the destruction of the world within himself, until the time finally comes for him to let the tension go and let the world.
By world, you're referring to creation with a capital C?
Essentially, yes, within a particular Brahmanda, so within a particular universe, not all of existence, but a whole creation of one Brahma.
Hmm.
Yeah.
How does Hiranyagarbha fit into this?
Hiranyagarbha is a word with various uses. For one, Hiranyagarbha is just a name of Brahma. Brahma is sometimes just called Hiranyagarbha.
Oh.
But because of its other meaning, it makes sense that it's identified with Brahma. Hiranyagarbha is, so it literally means golden egg, or golden womb, golden uterus, or golden embryo, or golden fetus. Garbha is this subtle word. It means, it kind of refers to the whole process of gestation rather than any specific physical structure. So it means,
so it's not the shell.
it's not the shell, it's the process of gestation. So Garbha means both uterus, egg, fetus, embryo, like the whole kind of gestating unit is what Garbha means. And golden in this sense is not meant in the sense of a color, a particular color, but in the sense of shining, radiant in general.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so it makes sense to call Brahma this. Brahma is Hiranyagarbha in the sense that Brahma, we call, they say Brahma is the creator, but it's not like a creator like a potter fashioning something. He is the process of creation. Like creation, like almost like the Bhagavatam when we read through these chapters, creation like sweats through Brahma's pores. It like things just emerge from his breath, emerge from his body. He's made of creation as a process. And so he is called Hiranyagarbha, this gestating embryo, because that is the essence of what Brahma is. He's the whole, he is creation itself as a process. And similarly, the whole world that Brahma makes is also referred to as Hiranyagarbha, as the golden egg, because the whole world, by which I mean like world in a large sense, a universe that Brahma makes, is itself like a womb, constantly full of growing and evolving life that kindles in it, like fire in a fireplace, so to speak. Yeah. So that's kind of how that's sort of a sense of how the term Hiranyagarbha is used.
Wow.
Absorbing.
Yeah, like constantly absorbing and churning, and with life in different forms. It kind of like it's like a nurturing container to grow new life in. So an egg is that, a uterus is that, you know, but it doesn't specifically mean any of those things in like an anatomical sense. It refers to the function and the process.
Could we say it's like warmed up being? It hasn't fully manifested yet, but it's lively.
Yeah. Like lively being that's like starting to form and grow, and like, and it is, and the garbha is like the enclosure that nurtures it, that creates the conditions in which life can start. And so that's why in some contexts it makes sense to translate it as an egg, because an egg is that, a uterus is that. But what garbha means, and this is actually how Sanskrit words in general work, they're not as concerned with describing objects, they're concerned with describing essences and processes.
Beautiful. That's profound just in itself.
Like for example, an example of this is like, even like the word for wolf, vrka. It doesn't mean wolf, it means terror or ripper. Like something that kind of like gnaws and bites and savages and rips. And anything that does that is a vrka. Like there isn't typically a word for like a specific animal, a specific object, a specific organ of the body. They're all words for the essence and the process of what the thing is doing. And that's kind of like the way that the Sanskrit language approaches having words. And that often makes translation of it
challenging.
It's subtle. It's always open to interpretation, because it's a very subjective and sort of poetic language. It doesn't have it's not concerned with making rigid terminology for objects. It's concerned with bringing out subtle essences and processes that are going on.
Wow.
I remember the story of Narada being disillusioned, infatuated with a woman and wanting to be chosen. And he ended up with a monkey face.
Yeah.
I've forgotten the word, but the word had those like ambiguities.
Yeah, exactly. There's tons of stuff like that.
Yeah. Fabulous. Wow. Thank you so much for doing this, Devala.
Yeah, thank you guys for coming. Yeah.
Namaste.
Namaste. Haribol.
Haribol.